Hey guys, it's Sadie from Sadie Saves the Day, and I have a review for you guys. I recorded this a really long time ago and I never got around to editing it, but here it is. A review of old Holland watercolors. I've been really wanting to do this review because these paints are kind of strange. You'll see what I mean in a second. But I actually really like them, even though I know that they're really expensive in the US, they're not as expensive over here. Okay, so let's talk about the stats. These paints come in 6ml tubes, which is super tiny. They are made in Holland, and they are available in both sets and open stock. There are 168 colors in this range. I don't even know why. They seem to have just ported whatever colors they had in the oil range over to the watercolor range, which makes some interesting mixes, to say the least. Lightfastness. Normally, I will just count to see how many are highest and lowest lightfastness, but I know that there are troubles with the way that Old Holland reports their own lightfastness, so I'll just say variable. The colors that I'm reviewing today are Golden Baroque Red, P065, Schwenningen Yellow Light, PY174, and Ultramarine Blue Deep, PB29. It's a nice little triad. So a lot of watercolor artists don't like these paints. They say that they lift too easily, they say that they're gloopy and difficult to re-wet and kind of gelatinous, and they say that they lift really easily, and there is an explanation. I was lucky enough that at my local store, there was a pamphlet talking all about Old Holland watercolors. And guess what I found when I looked at that pamphlet? There's a section that says this: these watercolors combine the best qualities of the original colors as used by the Chinese masters. All 108 colors are light fast. The old-fashioned Chinese binder accepts more pigment. This binder is based on distilled water, bleached crystal arable gums, pure glycerin, 99.9% with various mixtures of different natural sugar syrups, special selected honey, rabbit skin glue, rosin varnish made from roots, seaweed extracts, myrrh, etc. So what does that sound like to you? If you've seen my gansai video, you know exactly what that sounds like. That sounds like gansai. And what are the qualities of gansai? They happen to lift more easily than Western watercolors, they tend to mix differently, and they tend to have a different flow on the paper. Basically everything that people were complaining about Old Holland are the sort of things that are characteristics of gansai paints. Now, I don't know if these are true gansai paints. I don't know what the Chinese equivalent of gansai is. I know that a lot of traditional Japanese painting comes from China. And I also know that the Dutch were one of the few people who were actually trading with China and Japan a long time ago. So I think it's safe to say that Old Holland paints are some kind of mixture between Western watercolors and gansai paints, or some kind of pseudo-gansai. So that's something that's pretty important to keep in mind if you're going to think about painting with these paints. I'm not saying that to put you off, because personally I actually really like these paints, but it's an important thing to know. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's get to swatching. So these paints are just gorgeous. They're just beautiful. I love the texture of them. I love the vibrancy. They say that they pack twice as much pigment into their paints, and I believe them. You need very, very little amount of paint to get a high amounts of vibrancy. The saturation is off the charts. I love it. The colors also mix together beautifully well. This particular triad harmonizes really nicely. And that ultramarine is my favorite ultramarine. I have never seen an ultramarine that granulates like that ultramarine. If I were going to tell you nothing else about Old Holland, I would tell you to get that ultramarine blue, because it's just gorgeous. So I actually have in my palette, I have Schmincke's Ultramarine Finest, which does not granulate or granulates very little. And I have this one for when I want to go all out with granulation. Now, when you look at my swatches, you can see two things. You can see that these colors are highly transparent, which is, to be honest, considering how vibrant they are, a bit surprising. I'd expect them to be a bit more opaque, but they're very transparent. And once they dry, you get to see something else. You get to see that they all lift very much. I'm also doing some other tests here, so you can see how these paints look wet and wet, how easily they make a flat wash, how easily they make a graduated wash, and the glazing, as well as how these colors blend together. Okay, now let's look at this stuff dry. First thing you'll notice is that everything lifts really well, and that might not be too suspicious right now, but later on when I'm doing the painting, I can totally see this. They lift a little too well. I'll talk about that more in a bit. Just zooming in on that granulation, so nice. The colors blend and mix together really, really beautifully. It's really just gorgeous, the sort of patterns that you can get. The flat wash is nice and flat, the gradient is nice and gradiated, there's a lot of dispersion. Then there's the glazing. The glazing in a way is not bad, but you can see the paint lifting up as soon as I try to put another layer on. So to test out these paints, I decided to do a painting of a sunflower. And it was a lot of fun, but something that became really frustrating was how easily these paints lift. Basically, I have never seen this before. If you put water on the page, you can basically erase back to the white of the page. That might be what you're looking for, but if you're not used to it, that can be super confusing and super frustrating, and it was super duper frustrating. I feel like I had to paint the head of this sunflower, I don't know, maybe 10 times, maybe not 10 times, maybe like 3 times, but way too many times, because I really wasn't prepared for this effect of the watercolor paints, and I was expecting the layer to stay down, and that was the technique that I wanted to work with. That was not the technique that you can work with these paints. That being said, I actually still use these paints now, and I just changed the way that I use them. Now, the way that I use them is that I don't use them in any base layers, and I mostly try to use them towards the end of a painting or in a painting that doesn't have a lot of layers in it. That way, I don't have to worry about anything lifting up. Also, something that helps is mixing the Old Holland paints with a staining pigment, so I know that it's going to kind of bind and lock everything down. Another thing to look out for is lightfastness. So we were talking about that variable binder, and I'm kind of guessing that that is the reason why some of the colors have kind of strange lightfastness. Old Holland, of course, says that all the colors are very lightfastness, but if you go to the Handprint website, you'll see that some colors, even colors that are normally lightfast, just happen to not be lightfast from this brand. And I have a feeling that that is because of the gansai and because they were not really tested or particularly formulated with that in mind. So I think sometimes the binder is what yellows and changes as opposed to the pigment itself. So whenever I buy from this brand, I make sure to check the Handprint site before I actually choose a color. Now, would I recommend these paints to a beginner? Absolutely not. This is confusing, it's weird, they're weird paints. I would not tell you to start out your watercolor journey using these. No way. I think these paints are for somebody who is kind of wanting an adventure. If you're just here for the vibrancy and the saturation, and you don't mind paying the cost, and you don't mind the lifting, and you don't even mind that it might not be the most light fast, then these are the ones to go for. They're super fun to paint with, and I always love it. They're just not exactly the most practical brand. So because of the cost and the different quality issues, I gotta give them a 2 stars. That feels really bad because I like them a lot, but I gotta give them 2 stars. That doesn't mean that I don't think anybody should buy them, but just being honest about them. I will also say that I have gotten more paints from Old Holland, and I really love their earth colors if you can manage to find the single pigment ones. They are just so rich and beautiful. I love them a lot. In the end, I actually really enjoyed how this sunflower turned out. I feel like it has a sort of delicateness and vibrancy to it, which I couldn't get with any other paints. I really love the granulation and the texture that the ultramarine added to everything. And now that I know how to work with these paints, I could probably do this painting a lot easier the next time. So I hope that was useful and that didn't sound too weird. Old Holland is pretty weird though. See you guys next time. Bye!